because oxygen would not allow any amino acids to form. Oxygen is actually a very reactive chemical. We think of it as being essential for life as it is, but really it could be quite poisonous because it reacts with so many different things. In fact, even today, oxygen can be a poison. Like premature babies often went blind because at birth they were pumped with far too much oxygen and they made their eyesight, it stuffed up their eyesight. So here's a case, oxygen can be a poison. See, oxygen would not allow any amino acids to form. Any amino acids in any primordial soup, if there's oxygen around, the oxygen will eventually destroy them. So they're assuming there's no oxygen present. Now, once again, you have some bias there because people say, well, what's the evidence there was no oxygen in the past? Well, we're here, aren't we? And we couldn't have got here if there was oxygen in the past. You see, that's again the circular reasoning going on. And nowadays, people don't even believe there was ammonia, carbon, methane, and hydrogen in the atmosphere. Even that's been gone for some time. And now they try and do experiments with carbon dioxide and nitrogen, but then there's a far lower amount produced and a far lower variety produced of amino acids. And if you have carbon dioxide and nitrogen alone, nothing happens. But only in last month, they found evidence in some of what they call the world's oldest rocks. I don't believe their dating system, but according to their dating system, these are rocks 3.8 billion years old. And they found, because they looked at the uranium and thorium, and they said there must have been lots of oxygen around. And that was about as old as the oldest rocks, they say, too. And what they said is evidence of photosynthesis happening, but all they really found was evidence of oxygen. They're assuming it must have been produced by photosynthesis. Green plants produce oxygen for us. So they're assuming that this amazingly complicated process called photosynthesis was already around as old as the earliest rocks. And that's a problem. How do you get such a complex process like photosynthesis happening so early? You haven't got so much time as people think. You haven't got the billions and billions of years if photosynthesis was around that early. But if the oxygen wasn't produced by photosynthesis, you've got another problem, because if there was oxygen already in the atmosphere, then this chemical evolution could not have happened. And that's what Miller's experiment shows, that chemical evolution of amino acids can't happen if there's oxygen around. And yet now it's almost certain there was oxygen even in the oldest rocks. Another thing about the Miller experiment is that it had a trap which isolated the products from the destructive energy source. It's very convenient that you have this product circulating, and then any products are protected from the destructive energy, which would just destroy them really quickly. And this is not realistic, because in the real primordial Earth, if there's no oxygen, there can't be any ozone to protect you, because ozone is just an oxygen molecule with 3 oxygen atoms instead of 2. So if there's no oxygen, there's no ozone, so you've got enormous amounts of ultraviolet. And there's far more ultraviolet that will destroy amino acids than produce it. And also, the destruction is far more efficient than construction. So you've got 2 strikes against it. One is you've got far more of the destructive stuff, and the destructive stuff is far more efficient. So overall, you've got about 100,000 times more effective at destroying than producing. So you've got this, the amino acids produced in the supposed primordial atmosphere, but all that time it's being exposed to this devastating flux of ultraviolet light, destroying it. And even if it gets into the ocean somehow, you know, from miles up in the atmosphere into the ocean, it's not safe there, because ultraviolet can penetrate to tens of meters into the ocean. And don't forget, you can get sunburnt while swimming. The water won't protect you. So I'd say the trap is what I call unacceptable level of investigator interference. You see, to say that this is a simulation of the primordial Earth is just not true, because you've got this example of intelligent design there, the trap, to protect the molecules as soon as they've been formed. There's no acceptable trap in the primordial Earth. So let's look at some of the philosophy behind this. Is this evidence, is the Miller experiment producing amino acids evidence for chemical evolution? Well, you could say so. Yeah, it's evidence that amino acids can be produced. So yeah, in one sense it's evidence for evolution, but I'd say it's also evidence against it, because the amino acids are produced, even if you grant the impossible conditions, they're produced in very tiny traces. They are grossly contaminated, and they're racemic, which is an equal mixture of left and right-handed molecule of amino acids, which are all unsuitable for life. So in one sense, it's against it, because even given the impossible conditions, you get amino acids which are just not suitable to produce living things. And here I'm just distinguishing between the data and the interpretation, because I don't dispute the Miller experiment data. I dispute the interpretation that it shows that life can come from non-living chemicals. And as I say, depending on your worldview, your belief system, you can interpret the Miller experiment either for or against it. I think it makes far more sense to interpret it as evidence against the chemical evolution ideas. Now, to go from amino acids to proteins, see, what we've got here, you've got two amino acids. They have to link up to form proteins, hundreds of amino acids to form a protein. And what actually happens, so they come together, and what happens, these hydrogen and the oxygen react to form water, and they join the protein together. See, here's the protein, the peptide bond. See, once these were separate, now they're joined together, the peptide bond, and it releases the water. It's called a condensation polymer. Now you can continue this again. You see, you've got another amino acid coming along, and again you've got the link up here, and you get yet another peptide bond. You see, you can go the other side too, and you get yet another peptide bond. See how this can keep on growing? However, there's a big problem though. For one thing, is sometimes you get other reactions that can occur. You see, a real chemist does not do this. In fact, a real chemist would make sure that any of these groups here don't, well, this one won't, but there are some proteins which have quite reactive side groups on the end, and you have to protect it. You actually react it to something which will protect that, and then after it's joined to form a protein, you remove that protecting group. So it's quite a complicated process to add the protecting group, then to remove it. But of course, the primordial Earth did not have these organic chemists doing that for you. Now, there's another problem here. Let's look at this again. Don't forget the water molecule, because if you want to make the reaction go this way, downwards, you have to try and remove the water. In fact, a chemist will have chemicals around to remove the water that's produced there. And he certainly wouldn't have water in the reaction vessel. It would be the height of absurdity for a chemist who wants to make a protein to have water around. But do you think the ocean has any water around? If the ocean was a primordial soup, I'd say there's plenty of water around, which means the reaction's going to go this way.
Welcome back to Truth Seekers. So again, more problems, which indicate a designer as opposed to any of these things happening by chance. It's kind of like, Brandon, God made it so out of the realm of possibility that, you know, he doesn't give you any room to think it happened that way. I mean, you know, we've looked at fossils in the past. There's no, the fossil record is barren of all the thousands of intermediary linking. They come up with one or two things that are really extinct species of their own. And in the chain of transitional forms, say between a land animal and a whale, and they need tens of thousands of transitional forms at least, and they're not there, and they come up with one animal or something and say, well, there it is, you know, and they know that animals have gone extinct. That doesn't prove anything. Darwin said that if you can't find these links, throw my theory out. And so, I mean, you go on, and there's no reason. But, you know, you haven't been here that much, but Jay and I talk a lot about two things that Jesus said that keep human beings from the truth and from getting into his word. And one is sin, because if you sin, you're not going to want, Jesus said that the darkness is not going to come to the light, John 3, 17, 18, 19, because the light will make the darkness, sin, manifest. You have to expose your own sin and be willing to go to God and say, I give it up, I quit, and recognize what it is. And many people do not want to do that. So that keeps a whole huge amount of people away. I was one of those.